All right, welcome to this podcast that is going to deal with just some basics about ecosystems in general, and then about communities, the living parts of those ecosystems, and the relationships that the different organisms might have with each other, different species might have with each other. That's pretty important. So let's, without further delay. First of all, in terms of an ecosystem, climate is really, really important in determining what type of ecosystem you're going to have in the first place. Know that climate is different from weather. Weather is just day to day. Is it cloudy? Is it rainy? Is it whatever at a particular point in space and time? Climate, however, is the overall year-to-year conditions in a place, the overall temperature, the overall amount of precipitation, whatever it may be, that comes out of the sky. That is what determines climate. It is a much more long-term type of thing. And the climate, it really is what determines what kind of ecosystem, what kind of biome is going to develop in an area. If you don't have enough moisture, then you're not going to get a tropical rainforest. That's just the way it is. If it's too cold, you're not going to get a tropical rainforest. So it is the overall amounts of liquid and heat in an environment that is really going to determine what kind of life can live there. Okay? Now, we know that when we look at an ecosystem, we are looking at both biotic and abiotic factors. We know that the biotic factors are the living things, and the abiotic factors are the non-living things like the air, the water, the soil, the amount of light we're going to see, all those kinds of things. And it is together, those two things determine how productive an ecosystem is going to be. Now, productivity is an important concept, and we've already looked at it a little bit in class when we looked at how much photosynthesis was going on in our little bottles based on how much light they were exposed to. Productivity is a measure of how much of the sun's energy is actually getting converted to chemical energy, biomass, meaning into living tissue, okay? How much of the sun's energy is actually getting changed, converted into living tissue, and then once it's converted to chemical energy, living tissue, then it can be passed through a food chain. So essentially, the most fundamental productivity question is how productive are your producers able to be? How much of that sun's energy can those producers get converted into their own bodies, into sugar and the things they make with sugar in their own bodies? Because that can then get passed up the food chain to all the consumers. So how productive are the producers is called primary productivity. Remember, primary producers, it's the plants and all those photosynthetic things. So that's a really important aspect of an ecosystem and of a community. Okay? So what follows here are just a few slides of terms you want to know, and I'm sure you already do. Just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. You need to know what a habitat is, the area where an organism lives. We are talking about a habitat would include both the biotic and abiotic factors in an area. So this wolf is living in this woodland habitat. So are these trees, for that matter, living in this woodland habitat, and that has the place where an organism lives. A niche, or niche, I've also heard it pronounced, basically what an organism does in its ecosystem, its occupation, its job, its role. A squirrel's role is to collect acorns and live in nests up in trees and be eaten by hawks and things like that. Those are all part of its role in the ecosystem, okay? So its place in the food web, whatever temperatures it requires, what it eats, where it how it gets shelter, all these things are part of its niche, its role. Okay? Now, what organisms can share, what species, and let me make this clear, what different species can share a niche in an ecosystem, can share a role? The answer to that is nobody. No species can share an exact niche and environment, okay? No two species can share exactly the same niche within exactly the same habitat. Now, different species can share really what would appear to us to be almost the same niches, really similar niches, by kind of partitioning them out. And we're going to talk about this in just a minute. For example, it may look to us like these two birds are sharing the same tree, sharing the same resource, they are doing the same thing, but in fact, perhaps this bird is making use of the resources up in the top in the canopy of the tree, whereas this little sparrow-like bird might be making use of the resources at the base of the tree. And so even though they seem like they're in the same place doing the same thing to us, they are in fact doing slightly different things. Okay? We're going to come back to this idea of sharing a niche in just a minute. All right. Different species within an environment, that's a community, we're talking about the living parts of an ecosystem. Different species do interact with each other, okay? And that, of course, is what gives us the community. These interactions have effects on the ecosystem in which they live, and that's why they're important. There are three main categories of interaction that we'll talk about. Those are competition, predation, and symbiosis, okay? Three really important ones. Two of them are probably pretty obvious, okay? Competition. Competition, of course, is when organisms of the same, or what we're talking about here in terms of a community, of different species attempt to use the same ecological resource, for example, a food item or shelter, at the same place at the same time. That's going to create competition. If you're both trying to get the same piece of food at the same time, you're competing. Now, these two birds are clearly of the same species, so this isn't a really great example of a community level interaction because they should be of different species, but perhaps you have a lion and a hyena trying to eat the same meal. They might be competing, except for the hyena usually is smart enough to wait and come in after the lion is finished. Competition, getting back to this idea of occupying the same niche, there is an idea in ecology called the competitive exclusion principle. And all it says is that no two species can occupy exactly the same niche in the same habitat at the same time. There is always going to be a winner and a loser. One of them is always going to be a little bit better at occupying that niche, doing that role, than the other. And the losing species over time will not survive. They will get out-competed and they will not survive in that environment. So usually if you do find two that are trying to occupy the same place, somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose eventually. Okay? All right, now on to predation. Of course, you know this is where one organism eats another one. The predator is the one that does the eating. The prey, of course, is the one that gets eaten. Here we have a predator and a prey. It looks like two different species of lizards, and this guy is getting the better end of this deal. So, predator-prey. Now, symbiosis. This is really an important group because there's three subtopics under this. A symbiotic relationship is any relationship in which two species live closely together in some close association, two different species, okay? There are three types of symbiosis: mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. You need to know all three, all right? Mutualism is a type of symbiotic relationship in which both species, both members of the relationship benefit. Okay, they both benefit. Examples are flowers and their pollinators. The flower gets pollinated, the pollinator gets the nectar from the flower. Acacia trees and ants, they live in a mutualistic relationship where the ants live inside the thorns of the tree and thus they get shelter. The tree also provides them with food. The ants protect the tree. Anytime an insect tries to eat the leaves of the tree, the insects will swarm, the ants rather will swarm the insect and kill it, and so it is a mutually beneficial relationship. Commensalism. Commensalism is a symbiotic relationship in which one member benefits but the other is like meh, whatever, unaffected. Okay, barnacles on a shellfish. So here is a scallop and here are some barnacles on it. Barnacles are getting a benefit by having a place to rest, but theoretically the shellfish has not really been affected. Some people, I think, would argue that, you know, it's got added weight, it's being affected a little bit, it's, you know, but is it parasitic? Not really. It's not being affected that much, so perhaps it's just commensal. Cattle egrets, this is a really great example. These birds that hang out in fields with these cows, and as the cows move, they stir up insects in the field, and the birds eat them, eat the insects, and the cows are not really affected one way or the other. They're not being helped or hurt by the fact that the cattle egrets are there eating the insects that the cattle stir up as they walk around. Okay? Finally, parasitism is a symbiotic relationship in which one member of the relationship benefits and another member is harmed. Some great examples, of course, ticks. Everybody hates ticks. They are obviously getting a blood meal, and the host is getting hurt by losing blood and possibly getting infected with some kind of bacteria at the same time. Tapeworms, another parasite, lovely tapeworm there, and of course they are absorbing nutrients inside an organism that once, of course, the tapeworm absorbs these nutrients, the host can't get them, and so the host is being harmed, the tapeworm is benefiting. All right, so that's it. Some basic ecology, ecosystem terms, and some look at some relationships between different species in an environment. Competition, predation, symbiosis, 3 types of symbiosis. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. I will see you next time.